Hey, welcome back. And if it's your first time here, just welcome. Today, I'm going to do an experiment in time travel. Not the flux capacitor in the DeLorean kind. And if you don't know what that is, I suggest you Google flux capacitor and watch the 3 best films ever made. And I'm talking ever. No, what I'm talking about is taking something that happens over a long period of time and compressing it down to last just a few seconds. I'm talking time-lapse. So time-lapse is a combination of photography and videography. From photography, it uses things like composition, exposure, and then post-processing in things like Lightroom or Photoshop or something like that. With videography, it uses frame rates and shutter speed. And that is what I'm going to look at today. I'm going to try and assess which is the best shutter speed to use. So videography wisdom says that you should use a shutter speed that's twice the frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 or 25 frames a second, depending on where you are in the world, then you would shoot at a 50th of a second. But I'm not sure that's entirely true. So I'm going to do a test. I'm going to make 4 time lapses and I'm going to shoot at double the frame rate. So I'm going to shoot at 25 frames a second because I'm in England. So that will be a 50th of a second. Then I'm going to shoot at the same as the frame rate. So that's 25th of a second. I'm then going to go really, really quick. So I'm going to do a 250th of a second to see what that does. And then I'm going to go really, really slow and shoot at 1 second. So each frame of the shot will take a second to expose. I'm then going to set an interval of 5 seconds because I'm doing shots of the clouds passing this 16th century church. Then I think if I do anything less than 5 seconds, it's just going to look a bit too quick. So then I've got to work out how many exposures to take to actually make the time lapse. Now I'm shooting in England, which is 25 frames a second, which makes the maths slightly easier. So I'm going to use a 10-second time lapse just to show the test. So each one is going to be 10 seconds. Each second is 25 frames because each frame is a slice of the second. So that means that 25 frames equals 1 second. So 10 seconds is 250 frames. So I have to set the camera to take 250 frames. And now there are probably going to be a few people wandering around, and that will actually help me decide whether using a faster or slower shutter speed is good when you've got people moving in your time lapse. So come over here and I'll show you just how to set that thing up. So I've got my standard DSLR, standard kit lens, just to show you don't need anything fancy to create a time lapse. Got a tripod as well, obviously, and a polarizing filter, but that's just to bring the exposure down enough. There's no blue sky, so the polarizing filter is not actually going to do anything too much. To set the camera up, we need to turn the camera on, and I've got it set at 1 second, and I'm on f/18 and ISO 100. So this one, I'm setting it up for the 1 second. If I was setting it up for 1/25th, I'd go to 1/25th. If I was setting it up for a 50th, I'd go to 50th, and if I set it up to 1/250th of a second, I'd do that. The thing you need to do is always shoot in manual, and you set your shutter speed and you set your aperture, and then you set manual focus because you want full control. So the next thing to set is the time lapse. Now different cameras have different ways of doing this. This has got an interval timer built in. If your camera hasn't, you can actually buy an interval timer that you plug into where your shutter release goes. But this has got an interval timer, as you can see. So we'll then set this, go to that, and you can see that I've set a 5 second interval. So each shot is taken every 5 seconds. Go across there, and I've got 250 shots and 1 of each. And then it's just a case of moving that across, going to on, and then hitting OK. And then that starts shooting. Now, I'm obviously not going to let you sit here and watch me wait for God knows how many seconds it's going to be. We can probably work that out, but I'm not going to. So let's have a little look at the church while this is doing that, and we'll come back and then we'll see what the time lapses are like. So St Endonoc Church is a 16th century church. It's older than some people's countries, and as you can see, it's set in a little dell, and for a time it was actually buried in sand because it's actually made on sand dunes. And the clergyman or vicar or whoever goes in these churches, sorry I'm not very religious, had to climb in through a hatch in the roof. There's some famous people buried here. There's Sir John Betjeman, who was the English poet laureate. We have some other distinguished people from 2 world wars. So we've got Lieutenant Commander Gwyn there, and then this is C. Runnels, who died on the 10th of September 1916. He was age 34 now. That was in the First World War, and he was a private. And there's lots of really old graves in this churchyard, as you would expect, and then some rather ornate ones like this one that's surrounded in fencing. And actually, when you look at it, I mean, look at the intricate work on that headstone. It was obviously a cavalryman or something like that. So with the shots done, I can now take the images back to the computer and start making the time lapse. So why don't you join me? So here we are in Lightroom. I've got all the images imported and I've put them into their own folders so I know which time lapse is which, and I've got 1 second, 1/25th of a second, 1/50th of a second, 1/250th of a second. I'm going to work on the 1 second to show you how I do it. All the images are pulled in. As you can see, I've got from 1 all the way down to 250. So go into the develop mode, and then all I'm going to do is work on one image. So beauty of Lightroom for doing time lapses is you just have to do all the settings on one image. If your shot, like mine, was locked off, which is just set on a tripod doing no movement at all. So we're just going to work on the overall image to get the exposure correct on that. So what I'm going to do is just bring down the highlights virtually all the way down, bring down the whites, again quite a long way on the whites, just till I'm happy with the actual church here. Touch on the shadows, just a real touch on the shadows, and then overall bring down the exposure just so I'm happy with that roof, because the roof was a little bit bright. So just a smidge on the exposure. Not really going to touch anything else down here because it's just a test, so I'm not going to do anything crazy with the detail or the highlights and shadows color. Just going to leave that as is. Might just up the clarity a touch though. Okay, now we come on to the adjustment of the sky. So I'm going to go into select a brush, and I want to just make sure I cover the right amount of area. So I'm going to select the show selected mask overlay. So I'm just going to go to auto mask as well, and that should actually allow me just to select the sky. So we'll just start to paint that in. I'll just speed this bit up so you, because all it is me painting in. When you go around the edges, just make sure you're a little bit careful. So there we go, just fill all the sky in roughly first, and then we go back over and do the finer details. Okay, so now we've got that all filled in. We're just going to go over the edge. Now you can see there you've got a little bit of the mask has gone over the church spire. I'll just get rid of that. And on the land there. Okay, that looks all right. Just a little bit on the sea, so we'll get rid of that. And just zoom across the frame. Get that back in, and then we can do the adjustments. So we take off the overlay, take off that colour, and this is where we really want to bring the sky out, because that's the thing that's the main part of the time lapse. So I'm just going to drop the exposure down by 0.7. Contrast I'm going to put up at 20. I'm going to bring the highlights down all the way. That's -100. Not going to touch the shadows. I'm going to do -20 on the whites. I don't want to burn all the whites out. And the blacks I'm going to take right down to -40. Now you can see there I've actually missed a few little spots but I'll just carry on going on the edit. So I'm going to pump up the clarity a little bit, and then I'll just go over the bits that I've missed, and that'll bring the adjustment in on those areas. So in the first instance, you can see that's not too bad. That's actually brought the sky out fairly well, and the exposure looks pretty well balanced. But if I zoom right in, you'll see that there's quite a bit of fringing going on the church there, and also on the horizon. Now for a test I could probably leave that, but I just want to tidy that up. So I'm just going to go right over the edge just to bring that exposure in, and then I'll have to go back and take out the overexposed areas on the outside of the mask. So we just reselect mask so we know where we are. Take auto mask off, so bring down the flow and then up the feather, and then just paint over the edge there, so you can see that I'm getting some of the spire, and I'm just going to check to see how that's doing. So you can see it takes out that fringing, but it does give you a little bit of darkness on the edge of the bit you don't want to be dark. So I'm just going to then press my Alt key to select the remove brush and then brush over that, so it takes the exposure, so it's then doesn't look really fringy, if that's a word. So that doesn't look too bad. So now I can just take it out there, and you can see the difference. So I then have to go around all the spire, and you can just see it pulling back in, so you can see when you've done enough. Then we go all the way around. Some bits fall in quicker than others, so you just want to get it so it's looking right. And then I need to go back over with the minus brush selected, so I then remove that darker area around the inside of the spire. And I've got a slightly smaller feather on this one, so it's not quite so soft. Now if I was doing this for real, I'd absolutely make sure this was bang on, and I'd spend quite a long time doing it. But this is just for the test, so I'm just going to do it quite roughly. And then I do the same thing to the horizon, and then just go in, and you can see it just really smooths out that fringing line. Select the minus brush by pressing Alt, and keep Alt selected, and then just work your way back, and you can see that the feather there is again slightly smaller. And then we go back to the other side, and the other side's a little bit more complicated because you've got all these trees in the way and that house there. So we'll just darken it down until it looks sort of natural. Let's paint those in. Now the tips of the trees again are a little bit dark. That sea's a little bit bright anyway, so I'll just darken that off. There you go, that doesn't look too bad. It's a little bit darker than I would hope, but this is just a test, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. So all I do now is right click on the ones I've done the corrections to, and this brings up the copy settings, and then I can select all of the images just to make sure they're all selected, and then hit the sync button. That will come up with what you want synced, and then that will work its way through and sync all of those images, so they'll all have exactly the same adjustment on. And once all the settings are pasted, depending on how quick your computer is, each of those thumbnails will then start showing up the corrections made to it. And that is basically how you make a time lapse in Lightroom. So then you highlight everything you've got, again, go up to File, down to Export. That'll bring up the export box. So you want to choose where you want your time lapse to go. This is going into the 1 second. Select that folder, and then all I'm doing is, because I'm doing this in 4K, output it in 4K, keeping it as a JPEG, and then I'm just using 4000 pixels just because that's basically 4K. and I can pull that in, and then just click export, and Lightroom will do its stuff and export each of those. It's going to take a while, so I'll flip over to DaVinci and show you just how easy it is to create the time lapse in DaVinci. So this is DaVinci. I've just created a new file for the time lapse, and I've created a timeline for each time lapse. So all you do to bring those in is go to my media folder, import media, go to the folder that I want to import. So this is the 1 second. All the JPEGs are in there. Now the thing that DaVinci does is that will pull all those images in, and it will see that the file names are sequential, so it will pull them in as one clip, and it will set it automatically to your frame rate of your project, and in this case it's 25 frames a second. And you can just play the preview. It will stutter around a bit because it hasn't really had time to render it, and then pull that into the timeline, and there you have the time lapse. So I can just, because 4000 is slightly bigger than 4K, I can just then slightly adjust the zoom on the image just to get it right, and then that will play through. It's a bit jerky at the moment because the thing hasn't rendered it, but you can see the time lapse working quite well there. Now all I have to do here, because I don't have to do any adjustment in DaVinci, is go straight to the deliver tab. Everything's already set up in there. I'm just going to change the file name to 1 second so I know which time lapse I'm dealing with. Select the folder that I want it to go in. Keep everything the same apart from the format, and I'm going to select MP4 for that. Add to render queue, and then start the render. And because it's only 10 seconds, that should go through there pretty quick. And that's that done. And then I do exactly the same for all the others. So I'll go through each of them, and then I'm going to pop them up here. And I'll start with the quickest first, which is the 1/250th, and you can see it's a little bit jerky. I mean, it's not too bad, but the people moving through are really jerky. There's no movement in that at all. The 50th of a second, now I really like the 50th of a second on the sky, although again, when the people go through, they're a little bit quick. The 25th of a second, I think, is the best one for my liking. It's got really smooth movement in the sky, and I didn't get any people moving through the shot, unfortunately, on that instance. The 1 second, again, is really quite nice and smooth, but there's things moving in the background. There's a kite surfer in the background, and he's moving fairly quickly, and it's just a bit too blurry, and there's too many little artifacts. And I'm just going to pop up a comparison so you can see which one's which, and you can compare them directly. So I think you'll agree, each time lapse has its own merit, but I would like to know what you think. So please leave your comment down below and tell me which time lapse is your favourite. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell if you want to know when my next videos are coming up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.